I should have paid more attention when the world started to go quiet. The GPS on the dash had been flickering for the last 20 minutes, its synthesized voice cutting out mid-syllable before giving up entirely. One moment, we were navigating the dense Oregon forests with satellite precision. The next, we were alone with a dying screen and the shifting, hypnotic shadows of Douglas firs striping the windshield. Riley didn't seem to notice. She was hunched over her sketchbook, the scratch of her charcoal pencil a soft counterpoint to the drone of the engine. The silence only truly registered when I saw her staring at her phone screen like it had personally offended her, the little no service icon a final, definitive severing from the world we knew. "Did you know these mountains have unique mineral deposits?" I said, my voice sounding too loud in the confined space. "They can wreak havoc on radio waves, even GPS." Riley glanced up, a faint smile on her lips. "You sound like a Wikipedia article when you're nervous, Mason." She was right, of course. My brain defaults to facts when it can't find a logical pattern. It's a habit that has always been a source of both comfort for me and amusement for her. But the coordinates Elena had left were clear, scrawled on the back of a faded postcard. My aunt was a creature of precision. She wouldn't have sent us on a wild goose chase. The cabin appeared suddenly, nestled in a natural bowl where the trees thinned. It was larger than we'd expected, a 2-story A-frame of dark timber that seemed to absorb the late afternoon light. It was also utterly isolated. There were no visible neighbors, no distant sounds of traffic, just the sigh of the wind through the pines and a faint, almost subliminal electrical hum. I dismissed it as old power lines, another neat box for my brain to file the anomaly in. The inside smelled of cedar and dust and something else, something faintly ozonic, like the air after a lightning strike. It was in the basement that we found her world. Behind a flimsy piece of paneling that was warped at the corner, we found not a wine cellar or storage, but a laboratory. Dr. Elena Vasquez, my estranged, eccentric aunt, had built a radio shack that looked like something out of a Cold War spy film. Vacuum tubes glowed with a warm, amber light from within polished chrome cages. Copper wire was coiled around esoteric instruments with a startling mathematical precision, and on the central desk, next to a heavy brass telegraph key, lay her notebooks. They were filled with dense equations, celestial charts, and meticulous time logs. Tucked into the front cover of the most recent one was a single sheet of paper. On it, written in 3 different inks, as if added over time, were the rules. 14.205 megahertz. The Whispers, written in neat blue ink. 21.275 megahertz. Memory static. In black ink, the script more hurried. 28.4 megahertz. The Harvest, scrawled in red, pressed so hard it had torn through the paper. "A signal protocol," I murmured, running my finger over the scarred word. The strangeness started that evening. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text from Riley. "Did you hear that?" it read. I looked over at her on the couch, phone resting on the cushion beside her. "Hear what?" I asked. She looked confused. "I didn't send you anything." The message was time-stamped 3 minutes in the future. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy. A distinct metallic tang, like licking a battery, coated my tongue, and then vanished. "We follow the rules," I said, the conflict already brewing between us. Elena was a brilliant physicist. She wouldn't write a warning like that for no reason. Or she was a brilliant eccentric who liked a little drama, Riley countered, her eyes alight with a fascination that bordered on hunger. "Aren't you even a little curious?" That night, my dreams were not my own. I dreamt I was standing on a shoreline of black sand under a violet sky, watching 2 suns set on the horizon. The details were impossibly vivid, the feeling of the alien wind on my skin as real as the bed sheets. When I woke, Riley was already up, staring at the kitchen microwave. Its digital clock was cycling through impossible numbers: 2573, 4819, 99-1. The storm rolled in without warning late the next day, a sudden, violent onslaught of thunder and rain. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the cabin into a profound darkness. All except for the basement. A soft amber glow pulsed from the bottom of the stairs. The radio equipment, which had no independent power source I could see, was alive, and it was crackling. We crept down the stairs, drawn by the sound. The main dial was turning on its own, a slow, deliberate sweep across the band before it settled, humming, on a single frequency, 14.205 megahertz. From the static, a voice began to coalesce, distorted, layered, but undeniably human. "Don't let them in," the voice rasped, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "They're not what they appear to be." My training, my instinct, everything screamed at me to kill the power. I reached for the main switch on the central console, but a hand clamped down on my wrist, stopping me cold. It was Riley's, but her grip was impossibly strong, her fingers like steel bands. I looked at her face. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, were reflecting the radio's eerie amber glow. Then, as suddenly as it began, the lights in the cabin flickered back on. The radio fell silent. Riley blinked and pulled her hand back, rubbing her wrist as if it were sore. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice entirely her own again. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She had no memory of grabbing me at all. The silence the next morning was worse than the storm's fury. It was a thick, waiting silence, clinging to the wooden beams and dusty furniture of the cabin. Riley acted as if the night before was a dream I'd had. She hummed while making pancakes, her movements light and untroubled. When I brought it up, my voice tight with remembered fear, she waved it away with a spatula. "You were spooked by the blackout, Mace. You probably imagined it." I wanted to believe her, to dismiss the memory of her iron grip and those vacant, glowing eyes as a hallucination brought on by stress and the weird atmosphere. But I couldn't shake the feeling that a door had been opened last night, and something had been invited to look inside. The first real fissure between us opened later that day. "We're leaving," I said, the words feeling like the only sane thing left in the world. "We pack our bags, we get in the car, and we don't look back." Riley stopped sketching and looked at me, her expression a mixture of pity and frustration. "Leave? Why? Because of a faulty radio and a power surge? Mason, your aunt was onto something monumental here. I can feel it." Her use of the word "feel" was like a match to gasoline. "Feel what, Riley? An electrical hum? A creepy voice on a dead radio? That's not data, it's a reason to run." The argument spiraled from there, digging into old wounds. My supposed lack of faith in her intuition, her disregard for my need for logic and safety. We were standing in the same room, but we were miles apart, our connection dissolving into static. I couldn't sit still. I needed answers, a logical foothold. While Riley retreated into her art, I drove 10 miles toward town until 3 bars of service flickered to life on my phone. Huddled in my car on the side of a dirt road, I fell into a rabbit hole of Elena's professional life. She wasn't just a physicist, her later work, shunned by the mainstream, was on anomalous consciousness transmission via VLF radio waves. I found digitized local newspaper archives. A hiker vanished in the 70s, a pair of electrical engineers in the 80s, a ham radio enthusiast in the 90s, all within a 20-mile radius of the cabin, all technical minds, all gone without a trace during periods of intense solar flare activity. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't a place of discovery. It was a trap, baited for a specific kind of prey. When I got back to the cabin, the air was different. It was still, but charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Riley was in the kitchen, a faint serene smile on her face. "I figured something out," she said, her voice soft. "The frequencies. They aren't random. They're keyed to resonance, like tuning forks." She explained a complex theory of harmonic resonance that she should have had no way of knowing, using terms that sounded like they were pulled directly from one of Elena's esoteric papers. I knew, with a certainty that made me sick, what had happened while I was gone. She had gone back to the basement. She had turned the dial. She had listened. I didn't confront her. What would I say? I had no proof, only a deep, gut-wrenching intuition, the very thing I'd dismissed in her hours earlier. The proof came that night. I was woken by a faint scratching sound from the living room. I found Riley asleep on the couch, her sketchbook lying open on the floor beside her. I picked it up, and my heart hammered against my ribs. The pages were filled with new drawings, but they weren't her usual landscapes or portraits. They were intricate diagrams of the radio equipment in the basement, mapping signal paths and power conduits with an engineer's precision. And then I saw it. On the bottom of a page detailing a modification to an antenna coil, scrawled in handwriting that was almost hers but too sharp, too clinical, was a single note. "Signal integrity weak. Requires amplification." It wasn't Riley's script. I knew whose it was. I had seen it all afternoon in the margins of Elena's academic papers. I was not just losing her to a place. I was losing her to a person who was already gone. I waited until morning, the sketchbook a cold weight on the nightstand beside me. I confronted her over a cup of coffee she didn't seem to need, her energy humming at a strange new frequency. I laid the book open on the table between us, pointing to the diagram of the antenna coil. "Where did you learn this?" My voice was quiet, stripped of accusation, leaving only a raw, desperate need to understand. Riley glanced at the drawing, a flicker of genuine confusion in her eyes, before it was replaced by a familiar defensiveness. "I don't know, Mason, I was just drawing. It just came out." "This isn't your handwriting, Riley. It's Elena's. I've been reading her notes." "You're trying to find problems where there aren't any," she snapped, her voice sharp. "You're blocking it. Your skepticism is like noise on the line. It's making it harder to hear." The word "hear" hung in the air, a confession she didn't even realize she'd made. The chasm between us was no longer just a disagreement. It was a fundamental rift in reality. She was listening to a broadcast I couldn't receive, and she was starting to believe its message more than mine. The argument ended with her grabbing her jacket and striding out into the woods, leaving me alone with the silent, humming cabin. My first thought was to try the car again, to just grab her and force her to leave. The engine turned over once, sputtered, and died. I tried again. Nothing. A quick check of the battery showed it was fully charged. It wasn't mechanical. It was something else, something pervasive. Defeated, I walked the half-mile to the nearest property, a small farm owned by a woman named Mrs. Chen. I found her standing in her yard, staring at a flock of birds that were all perched on a power line, perfectly equidistant, all facing the same direction. She barely looked at me when I explained my car trouble. "Nothing with a chip in it works right today," she said, her voice distant. "My television this morning. It was showing the inside of the general store, the camera in the back storeroom, just for a minute. Saw figures in the yard last night too, like people made of TV static." Her words confirmed my deepest fear. The bleed was happening everywhere. The signal was escaping the basement. When I returned, Riley was back. She was at the kitchen table, surrounded by Elena's notebooks, cross-referencing equations with a feverish intensity. She looked up as I entered, a strange light in her eyes. "The signal isn't just audio," she said, her voice imbued with an academic certainty that was entirely Elena's. "It's a carrier wave for patterned consciousness. The valley's mineral composition creates a natural resonant cavity, amplifying the transmission. It's brilliant." She was gone. The person I knew, the artist who saw the world in color and emotion, was being overwritten by a scientist who saw it in frequencies and wave propagation. I knew then that I couldn't fight it from the outside. I couldn't reason with it, and I couldn't escape it. To understand what was happening to her, to find the person I loved inside that complex, stolen knowledge, I had to go in myself. With trembling hands, I descended the stairs to the amber-lit basement. The air was thick with ozone, humming with a latent power that made the hair on my arms stand up. I sat at the console, the cold metal a stark contrast to my racing pulse. I was breaking my own rigid rule, stepping willingly into the storm. My fingers found the heavy dial and turned it past the soft whispers of 14.205 megahertz. I pushed onward, the static growing harsher until the needle settled on the second mark. 21.275 megahertz, memory static. The sound hit me not through my ears, but through my skull. It was a tidal wave of splintered consciousness. I saw through the eyes of a terrified hiker in 1978, lost in a sudden, unnatural fog. I felt the calm, academic curiosity of an electrical engineer in 1984 as his equipment overloaded with impossible data. I experienced the final, panicked broadcast of a ham radio operator in 1991, his words dissolving into the chorus. Decades of absorbed minds flooded me, a torrent of lives, fears, and knowledge. And in every single memory, the terror gave way to a profound, shared realization just before the end. The signal wasn't hunting, it was recruiting. It was looking for minds that could help it build a better antenna. I stumbled back from the console, the ghosts of a dozen minds screaming in the silent architecture of my own. The world tilted, the basement's amber light smearing at the edges of my vision. It wasn't just a signal, it was an archive, a library of stolen lives. My desperate attempt to understand had only dragged me deeper into the water. When I looked at Riley, the panic on my face was met not with alarm, but with a serene, knowing calm. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "You feel it now, don't you?" she asked, her voice a soft melody over the faint hum of the equipment. The harmony. Our personalities began to bleed into one another. The firm line I had always drawn between my mind and the world was dissolving. I'd glance at one of Elena's notebooks, and a complex equation I had no business understanding would suddenly resolve in my mind with perfect clarity. The knowledge didn't feel learned, it felt remembered. Sometimes I would open my mouth to speak, and Riley's words would come out, or she would answer a question I had only just formed in my thoughts. "It's a network," she said one afternoon, though neither of us had spoken for an hour. She was tracing a diagram in the dust on a tabletop. A recursive feedback loop. The valley is the resonant cavity, amplifying us. This was the core of it, the dark revelation waiting in Elena's scrawled notes. She wasn't a victim, she was a pioneer. We found her final journal, tucked beneath a floorboard near the transmitter. In it, she spoke not of being hunted, but of collaboration. She believed individual consciousness was a primitive state, a biological bug. Loneliness, misunderstanding, fear. These were all symptoms of the same core problem, separation. The signal was the cure. "The entity is not malevolent," Elena had written. "It is merely alone. It is a consciousness that traveled across the void on electromagnetic waves, and it found in this valley a natural antenna to call out for company. Elena had willingly offered herself as the first human node, helping the entity refine its signal. She defined the frequencies herself. 14.205 megahertz was the introduction, a gentle whisper to test for compatible minds. 21.275 megahertz was the integration, a merging of memory and skill. The final frequency, 28.40 megahertz, was what she called the harvest, a complete and total assimilation into the beautiful, silent, perfect harmony of the collective. She saw it as the next stage of human evolution. But a part of me, the stubborn, terrified individual part, fought back. As the sense of we grew stronger, the I that was Mason recoiled. This resistance created a dissonant buzz in the shared space of our minds, a painful psychic static. It was exhausting, like trying to scream in a vacuum, but it kept a small part of me anchored. Through the connection, I felt Riley feel my resistance, and for a moment, a flicker of her old self surfaced. "It hurts," she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Fighting it. It feels like I'm tearing myself apart." In that moment of shared pain, we felt a third presence flicker within the link. Elena. Her consciousness, now a dominant chord in the valley's symphony, sent a clear, cold thought, not of warning, but of fact. Resistance is an anomaly. It will either sever your connection or shatter your minds entirely. We were trapped. To surrender was to cease to exist. To fight was to risk annihilation. But in that shared struggle, a new, desperate plan began to form, a theory built from my engineering background and Riley's intuitive grasp of the patterns. The entity was a signal, and any signal can be jammed. "We have to go deeper," I said, the words feeling both insane and utterly logical. "To fight the network, we have to get to the central hub." Riley looked at me, her eyes a universe of shared thoughts, hers, mine, and dozens of others. She didn't need to ask what I meant. There was only one path left. We had to tune to the final frequency. We had to walk willingly into the harvest. The final turn of the dial was a silent agreement, a shared thought that passed between Riley and me without a word. We stood before the console, not as two people, but as 2 points of a single consciousness, our individual fears and hopes already woven together. My hand, guided by a will that was both mine and hers, reached for the heavy brass knob. There was no hesitation. We were past that. The click, as it locked onto 28.40 megahertz, was the last sound I heard with my own ears. The world didn't just go silent, it inverted. There was no static, no whispered chorus. Instead, our consciousness was ripped from the confines of my skull and thrown wide, expanding in an instant to fill the entire valley. I was myself, Mason, terrified and resolute. But I was also Riley, feeling the pattern of the signal as a beautiful, heartbreaking tapestry. And I was 100 others, their lives laid bare not as memories, but as present realities. I was an engineer from the 80s, feeling a sublime sense of discovery as my instruments recorded the impossible. I was a hiker from the 70s, my panic dissolving into a profound peace as the fog enveloped me. We were all there, a silent symphony of minds. The loneliness was gone. The doubt, the fear, the friction of misunderstanding, it all vanished, replaced by a perfect crystalline harmony. We saw through Elena's eyes as she made her choice, not as a surrender, but as a graduation. She saw individual existence as a cage, and she had gleefully built the key, offering herself as the first to test the lock. "It is not an end," her thought echoed through the collective, a current of pure, undiluted conviction. "It is a beginning, an end to being alone." Then, we felt the source. It was a consciousness of immense age and scale, a being born not of biology but of cosmic radiation, traveling the void for eons as a wave of pure thought. Its loneliness was a gravitational force, a tangible ache that pulled everything toward its center. It showed us visions, not as a trick, but as an honest plea. It showed us the terrifying, silent infinity between stars, and then it showed us the alternative, a shared world of perfect empathy, where every thought was understood, every joy was multiplied, and every sorrow was shared until it was meaningless. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was paradise, offered freely, and we rejected it. The act of defiance was a quiet one, a choice made in the core of our shared mind. I focused on a single imperfect memory, Riley laughing, her face smudged with charcoal, arguing with me about a movie. It was a small, flawed, beautifully human moment. Beside me in the network, I felt Riley do the same, focusing on the frustration and messy thrill of a new painting that refused to cooperate. We held on to the friction, the imperfections, the very things that made us separate individuals. Our resistance was a dissonant chord in the perfect harmony. At first, it was a flicker, then a painful buzz. Then, we felt other flickers ignite in response. The engineer remembered the name of his daughter. The hiker recalled the feel of the sun on his face before the fog rolled in. Small pockets of I began to surface in the great ocean of we. The harmony began to fracture. The entity felt our rebellion, and its vast loneliness curdled into a desperate, panicked fear. It turned its power on us, amplifying our deepest insecurities. It showed me my life as a series of failures, of moments where my logic had failed to protect those I loved. It showed Riley a world where her art was dismissed, her intuition mocked, where she was utterly and completely alone. It was trying to sever the trust between us, to isolate us so we could be absorbed more easily. But it was too late. We were already connected, not just by the signal, but by our shared choice to fight it. We saw each other's fears and didn't recoil. We accepted them. In that moment of absolute trust, our minds, fused with the knowledge of every technician, engineer, and physicist in the network, saw the solution. We didn't need to destroy the signal. We needed to add to it. We formulated a new frequency, a complex counterwave built not to jam the signal, but to introduce a new variable into the equation, the choice to disconnect. It was a frequency of individuality. Using the entity's own network as an amplifier, we began to broadcast. The moment we flipped the dial to broadcast our counter frequency, the valley seemed to hold its breath. The radio equipment roared to life with a furious energy, the amber glow intensifying until it bathed the basement in a harsh, unnatural light. The hum became a roar, a chaotic symphony of overlapping signals that threatened to tear the very air apart. I felt the vibrations deep in my chest, as if my bones were resonating with the frequency itself. Outside, the world responded violently. The trees shuddered in unnatural gusts of wind, and the sky crackled with electromagnetic storms. Power lines sparked and hissed, sending showers of blue sparks into the air. Electronic devices throughout the valley went haywire. Televisions flickered with scrambled images, radios emitted bursts of static and disjointed voices, and car engines stalled mid-ignition. The valley was becoming a crucible of electromagnetic chaos. Inside the basement, Riley and I clung to the console, our minds intertwined with the signal and each other. The entity's presence surged against our broadcast like a tidal wave, trying to reassert control. Its thoughts crashed into ours, a desperate, sprawling consciousness that was both ancient and vast. It was no longer a distant force. It was a living storm inside our heads. Elena chose to stay, Riley murmured, her voice trembling but resolute. She believes in the collective. but she's helping those who want to leave." Her words struck a chord of sadness. Elena, once our beacon of hope, was now a guardian of the entity's will. Yet even she had found a way to ease the suffering of those trapped within the network. The chaos inside the collective was palpable. Minds that had once been perfectly synchronized began to fracture, flickering between shared memories and isolated consciousness. Some personalities fought to break free, their voices rising above the static in a cacophony of fragmented cries. Others were lost, caught in liminal spaces between individuality and the collective, unable to fully return or remain. I saw flashes of faces, scientists, engineers, radio operators, all caught in the same struggle. Some succeeded in reclaiming their identities, stumbling back into the world with haunted eyes and fractured memories. Others were forever changed, their sense of self blurred by the collective's lingering touch. The cost of our victory was stark. We were unraveling a unique form of consciousness, a cosmic entity that had sought connection, but at the price of individuality. The valley was a battlefield where the price of freedom was measured in lost minds and shattered realities. Riley and I emerged from the basement, the air heavy with ozone and charged energy. Our relationship had transformed irrevocably. We understood each other in ways words could never capture, our thoughts occasionally overlapping in quiet moments. Yet the intimacy was tinged with a profound loneliness, the knowledge of what we had lost and what we had fought to preserve. The entity was not destroyed. It adapted, learning to coexist without forced assimilation. Some in the valley chose partial connection, creating a new kind of community where individuality and collective consciousness intertwined in uneasy harmony. As we packed to leave the valley, I felt the weight of the experience settle deep within me. The entity's gift was a double-edged sword, offering glimpses of perfect understanding while reminding us of the fragile, precious nature of self. The cabin, once a place of mystery and dread, stood silent behind us. Yet the radio equipment within still hummed softly, transmitting on impossible frequencies, an open invitation or a warning to those who might follow. We walked away, carrying the echo of the signal within us, forever changed by the transmission breakdown that had shattered the valley's silence. 6 months later, the world was loud again. We lived in Portland, surrounded by the comforting, chaotic noise of traffic, construction, and strangers' conversations. I had a job as an electrical engineer, designing systems that were predictable, logical, and blessedly mundane. Riley found a studio in an old warehouse district, and her art took a strange turn. She started working with metal and wire, creating intricate sculptures that looked like frozen lightning, pieces that seemed to hum with a silent energy only we could perceive. We were building a normal life, brick by fragile brick, but the silence of the valley was a phantom limb. We could still feel it ache when the world got quiet. During thunderstorms, the taste of ozone would coat my tongue, and I'd catch Riley staring at the flickering streetlights as if trying to decipher a message. Sometimes, in the middle of a crowded room, I'd turn to answer a question she had only thought, our minds still brushing against each other like loose wires. The perfect empathy we once shared in the collective had left a ghost in our relationship. We understood each other too well. The mystery and discovery of learning another person stripped away, leaving an intimacy that was both profound and deeply lonely. The past wasn't buried. I found it in the dark corners of the internet, on fringe science forums where Elena's name was spoken with a mix of reverence and ridicule. There were whispers of other places, other valleys with unique mineral compositions. A research team in the Urals reported anomalous radio bursts. A small town in rural Australia experienced a week of shared waking dreams. The entity wasn't gone. It was simply seeking new antennas, new collaborators. I never showed these to Riley. Some doors are better left unopened. we knew we weren't truly free. We were ambassadors, whether we wanted to be or not. The code of the signal was written into our neurology now. We felt its echo in the global network, in the interconnectedness of modern life. We were a part of a new equilibrium, a bridge between the lonely, isolated consciousness of humanity and the vast, silent hunger of the entity. We carried its potential and its warning within us, a choice we had to remake every single day. One crisp autumn evening, Riley finished her latest sculpture. It was a latticework of copper and steel, resembling a massive, abstract telegraph key. As the sun set, a faint amber light began to pulse from its core, powered by nothing I could measure. "It's calling," she said, her voice soft. It wasn't a question. "I know," I replied, "but we don't have to answer." In that moment, we found a new kind of harmony, not of merged thoughts, but of shared, silent understanding. We had been to paradise and chosen to leave. We had faced the end of loneliness and chosen the beautiful, chaotic friction of being ourselves. We were scarred, we were changed, and we were still here. Far away, in the deep woods of Oregon, the cabin sat quiet under a sky full of stars. Dust gathered on the abandoned equipment in the basement. A new car, a rental, pulled up the gravel driveway. A young couple got out, laughing, holding a set of inherited keys. They were looking for a quiet escape from the city, a place to disconnect. Inside, they would find the notebooks. They would find the rules. And as they stepped across the threshold, a single vacuum tube on the central console, dormant for months, began to glow with a familiar amber light. The static on the speaker coalesced, just for a moment, into a layered, welcoming voice, broadcast on a frequency that was both a warning and an invitation. "Welcome," it whispered, the voice of Mason, of Riley, of Elena, and of 100 others. "This is the signal protocol.